The hall went quiet the moment the helicopter blades rattled the windows. Old veterans in ball caps and bolo ties froze with their forks halfway to their mouths. Cigarette smoke curled in the doorway as boots clomped heavy on the wood floor. And then the door swung open. A SEAL captain strode in dust, still on his shoulders, voice carrying like thunder across the VFW hall in Odessa. "Commander Holstead, we need you." I stood straight in my jacket, and for one breath, the world held still. Across the table, my father's face drained, pale. His glass slipped in his hand, whiskey dripping onto the tablecloth. The crowd rose to their feet, every veteran in that room standing to salute. Every veteran except him. That's the part folks remember. But to understand why it cut so deep, I need to take you back long before the salute, long before the helicopter. Back to the smirk. The VFW hall smelled of coffee gone burnt and brisket that had been reheated twice. Folding chairs squeaked as people settled in, and the old wooden stage sagged under the weight of a row of American flags. It was the Veterans Gala, our little town's way of showing respect every 4th of July weekend. Odessa didn't have much oil rigs Friday night football, a Walmart that shut down too early, but when it came to veterans, folks showed up. I came in wearing my navy blues, the same uniform that had carried me across oceans into dusty camps in Afghanistan, and through years my father never cared to hear about. I thought maybe tonight he'd see me differently. But the second I walked past his table, I heard it. "Just a prop for the guys." He smirked that half grin I'd known since I was a girl. It was the smirk he used when he won an argument, when he belittled, when he reminded the world he was Colonel Frank Holstead of the 82nd Airborne, Wharton, Texas. That smirk had been my shadow, my entire life. A couple of men chuckled along, not because they agreed, but because when Frank Holstead spoke, folks tended to nod. He'd earned silver stars in Vietnam, a Purple Heart, and a reputation for being too tough to bend. Around Odessa, his word was gospel. And his gospel had no place for a daughter in uniform. I didn't answer, didn't flinch, just walked past the click of my heels, swallowed by the shuffle of plates and the rattle of ice in plastic cups. But inside, that old familiar burn crawled up my chest. I grew up on the edge of the West Texas oil fields in a house where respect meant keeping your voice low when Dad came through the door. He'd stomp the dust off his boots, drop his cap on the counter, and the whole house shifted to his rhythm. My brothers Mark and David worshipped him. He taught them to throw a football in the yard, showed them how to strip a rifle, told them stories of Hu and Khe-san until their eyes shone with pride. Me? He told me to help Mom shell peas, to stay out of the way. I remember one 4th of July parade when I was 10. He wore his old dress uniform chest full of medals, marching with the veterans down Grant Street. Folks clapped and cheered, waving little flags. I trailed behind, holding my mother's hand, wishing I had a uniform of my own. When I whispered, "Someday, I'll wear one," he snorted loud enough for folks nearby to hear. "Uniform's no place for girls, Sarah. You just get in the way." That was my father's love language, cutting words dressed as truth. But I didn't forget, and I didn't forgive. By the time I turned 18, the oil rigs were booming, my brothers had jobs with Halliburton, and my father was the big man at the VFW. He wanted me to follow Mom's path, marry local, stay, quiet, raise kids. Instead, I signed my enlistment papers for the Navy. He didn't come to the swearing in, didn't write when I went through boot camp at Great Lakes. The only letter I got was from Mom with a $20 bill folded inside and a note, "Don't tell your father." It was bitter cold on those early mornings in Illinois. Frost on the windows, the taste of metal in the air from the lake wind. We ran in formation until our legs burned, shouted chants until our throats tore raw. I slept on steel bunks, fought through blisters, learned to stand taller than I felt. And through every mile, every shout, every push-up in the freezing dark, I heard his voice. "Uniforms, no place for girls. Just a prop for the guys." It lit a fire under me, a fire I carried into the years that followed, across seas, into deserts, into places he'd never know. But that night at the Veterans Gala, he still saw nothing but the girl trailing behind him on Grant Street. That smirk was his verdict, his sentence. his denial of everything I'd become. And that's when the helicopter came. That smirk wasn't born that night. It took root years ago, watered by small moments and careless words that stuck like burrs on a wool jacket. I grew up west of the Ector County Courthouse, in a one-story house with a tin awning that rattled when the wind kicked up. Pump jacks nodded outside town like they were praying. On hot evenings, the smell of mesquite smoke mixed with gasoline and cut grass and cicadas kept time. Inside our house, you found your way by my father's footsteps. Frank Holstead carried a room like it belonged to him. When he stood in the doorway, my brothers Mark and David sat up straighter. Mama Lane slid the skillet off the burner and said grace a little quicker. I kept the cups full and measured every word. He loved the 4th of July, the parade down Grant flags snapping in dry wind, the high school band sweating through their uniforms. He marched in a jacket that fit a younger man medals flashing like fish scales. Neighbors hollered, "That's Frank." Pride was easy on him. On me, it came quiet. I walked with Mom, palms stinging from clapping, wishing for a uniform that was mine. I did small things to be close to his stories. I ironed his shirt before VFW meetings, careful of the ribbons. He tapped a finger on the silver star and said, "Careful. That ribbon's for men you wouldn't understand." He said it like weather. It still cut. He poured himself into my brothers. Under the porch light, he ran football drills, barked counts, showed them how to plant and turn. "That's how Holsteads do it," he'd say. To me, "Hand me that towel, sweetheart." I handed it over like it weighed 100 pounds. When I was 12, Mom took me to Corpus Christi for her cousin's wedding. Dad stayed home to mind the boys. We walked the seawall in a stiff wind, gulls crying salt on my lips. Out in the bay, the USS Lexington sat anchored like a sleeping giant. We toured it for $3. Oil and iron hung in the corridors. I laid my hand on cool metal and felt a hum that wasn't there. Right then, I knew where my path ran. I bought a postcard of the flight deck and hid it in my science book. At night, with the box fan rattling, I traced the outline of that ship and pictured myself moving there with a purpose that didn't require anyone's permission. Back home, the grooves held. Dad told the same Vietnam stories to the same men at the VFW. I waited tables at Penny's Diner on 8th to save money. Mr. Earl Simmons, a Korean war vet, sat at the corner booth. He'd say, "Morning, Commander." He was the first to call me that. By 16, I was running 2 miles before school, building a spine that didn't shake when he looked at me. I kept Navy pamphlets folded in a shoebox under my jeans and read them like scripture. One night after dinner, I stood by the table while Dad read the Odessa American. My palms were slick. "I want to wear the uniform," I said. He didn't look up. "Uniform's no place for girls. You'll just be in the way." The words landed and kept landing. Mark snorted. David hid his smile behind a Coke. Mom fussed with the faucet. I wanted to say, a ship isn't a kitchen, that courage doesn't care about chromosomes. Instead, I nodded, went to my room and did push-ups until my arms trembled. He wasn't only hard. Some nights he opened a shoebox of photos, muddy boots, skinny boys, grinning letters from friends who didn't make it home. His voice fell into a softer register I hardly knew. Fireworks made him flinch on the 4th. Mom touched his sleeve and he'd say, "I'm fine," and swallow hard. I learned 2 truths: my father was brave and my father was wrong about me. Junior year, I joined ROTC. He called it playing soldier. When I showed him my marksman ribbon, he said, "Cute." I wore it anyway. Mr. Alvarez at the machine shop taught me to change my oil. Don't wait on a man to get you anywhere. Mrs. Gomez slid a Navy novel into my locker with a note, "To seas you haven't seen yet." Small kindnesses, stacked like bricks. Senior year, the recruiters set up a folding table in the cafeteria. Petty Officer LaGrange didn't sell me heroics. He sold me work, early morning steel decks, doing it right the first time because the second time might not come. "You want to be useful?" he asked. "We've got room for useful." I felt seen. I left a brochure on the counter on purpose. Dad thumbed it. "You going to pass out Band-Aids?" he said, smiling like it was a joke. I smiled like it was too, then tucked the brochure under my pillow and slept like I finally had a map. On my 17th birthday, I stood at the track at Permian before dawn, breath-clouding stars, low and bright. I ran till my lungs burned, then watched pink leak into the sky. The town creaked awake, diesel engines, dogs. I took out the Lexington postcard and wrote 3 lines on the back: I will go. I will serve. I will not ask permission. I didn't hate my father. I hated the fence he kept building around my life and calling it love. Maybe telling me no made his world safer, kept ghosts from walking through the door. I tried to make room for that. I also made room for me. The summer before senior year, I'd saved enough to ride the bus to the recruiter's office in Midland. The vinyl seat squeaked under me. I signed the first papers the day I turned 18. The pen left a groove. When I got home, Dad was in the yard, hosing mud off his boots. Water ran toward the gutter, carrying little rivers of West Texas dust. "I'm doing it, Dad," I said. He didn't look up. "We'll see." But I had seen. That was enough. And the clock that had been ticking inside me since the day I touched the steel skin of the Lexington finally struck. The bus pulled into Great Lakes in the dead dark, and the air off Lake Michigan knifed straight through my Texas jacket like it had a grudge. Sodium lights through long yellow pools over chain link and snow dust, and some hidden speaker barked orders in a voice that didn't need a second chance. I remember thinking, this is where the noise in my head will either stop or get louder. They herded us out, sleepy kids with fresh haircuts and 2 big duffels, and the cold slapped everybody awake at once. A petty officer with a brimmed cover walked the line like he'd seen this 1,000 times and wasn't impressed any of those times. Phones in the box, contracts in your right hand, eyes front. Someone sniffled. He turned his head just enough. "If you're crying now, you're going to dehydrate by breakfast." Processing days, blurred shots, hearing tests, dental x-rays forms that ask the same questions 3 ways. They shaved the edges off our old lives with a clipboard. I traded my name for a last name, shouted down a hallway. I traded my clothes for a sea bag heavy enough to tilt my hips. They gave us a ditty bag, razor soap, a toothbrush that felt like government issue even before I used it. We learned to fold underwear into rectangles that could pass inspection by a ruler. I had folded plenty of towels for my father. This folding was a different kind of prayer. Our recruit division commanders' RDCs were 3 storms in different bodies. Chief Rangel had a gravel voice that sounded like it came from under a pier. Petty Officer Kim was a machine with calves like cables and a stare that could push you back a step. Petty Officer Doyle did not yell much. He just appeared at your elbow when you least wanted him there and said, "Start again." The first night he walked the racks, stopped at my bunk, glanced at my corners. "You iron at home, Holstead?" he asked. "Yes, Petty Officer." He nodded, like he could see the life I was trying to stand up inside. "Then iron this place with your feet." Revel came before the sun had decided what to do. The compartment woke as 1 animal 40 women, swinging their legs to the deck sheets, made tight enough to bounce a coin boots, finding the exact same piece of floor. The window glass wore a thin skin of ice. Great Lakes smelled like metal and laundry steam and something sharp from the lake. When the RDCs blew in, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees, or maybe that was just fear leaving the body too fast. We learned to move as a unit on the word, not the idea of it. We learned that trays slide faster when they are clean, that mops don't argue that time is a thing you can fight and lose 12 times in a morning. Marching to chow, I felt the cadence settle into my bones. Left, 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 right, left. Somebody started a call. Everywhere we go, and we answered, because that was the job. People want to know who we are, so we tell them the words weren't poetry, but they were warm when everything else hurt. I wrote home the first Sunday afternoon they gave us. The day room was quiet except for the scratch of cheap pens and the hiss of the radiator. I told Mom the food wasn't bad, if you ate fast, that my bunkmate from Iowa snored, that my hands already smelled like Brasso and would probably smell that way forever. I didn't write to my father. The blank where his name would have gone felt honest, in a way I hadn't earned yet. Weeks stacked like crates, swim qual in the big blue tank, firefighting lab with heat licking our cheeks while we crawled low under a cloud of fake smoke that felt too real. Line handling with rope that burned your palms if you let your mind drift even a little. We ran. We drilled. We learned where our elbows were in relation to other people's ribs. My feet blistered and then blistered again on top of the first blisters. I learned to tape them before lights out and not think about tomorrow until tomorrow showed up with its boots on. Petty Officer Kim timed our push-ups. Don't look at the deck. It's not seeing you back. I wanted to tell her that decks answer you if you learn how to listen, but I saved it. I counted quietly and thought about the Lexington postcard still tucked in a Bible at home. 50 push-ups felt less impossible when I filled the space between 1 and 2 with the hiss of air over a carrier deck. In the chow line, a kid from Tupelo asked me what Texas was really like. Flat and loud, I said. Good loud. A woman from Detroit said she had joined to get as far from her old corner as possible. I said I had too, but the corner I left had my father standing on it. What did he say when you shipped? She asked. We'll see, I said. She nodded like that was a full sentence. Mail call was a kind of weather. Some days it rained for other people and skipped me entirely. When my name did get called, the envelope was soft in the middle from a folded bill and smelled like Mom's hand lotion. Eat something good she'd written once and don't tell your father. Another time, she tucked in a clipping of the Odessa American photo of the parade, my dad in his jacket, looking like the statue they'd build one day if they had the money. No note on that one. I put it back in the envelope and told myself I would throw it away. I didn't. I never saw his handwriting. Not once. It would have been small neat, the way he wrote grocery lists when he was in a good mood. I missed it and didn't. When guys in the division waved their letters and grinned, I smiled with them and pressed my palms together behind my back until I felt something like calm. We were issued our dress blues. The first time I put that jacket on, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't blink. The wool sat heavy on my shoulders. My name tape was straight my gig line, perfect. The girl from Grant Street was in there somewhere, but she didn't get a vote anymore. Petty Officer Doyle drifted up next to me in the reflection. Looks like it belongs Holstead, he said. It does, I said, surprising both of us. The day we did the confidence chamber, the line wound around the cinder block hall. A recruit in front of me whispered Hail Marys that came out as steam. Inside, the CS gas burned your eyes and taught you that panic is a choice you can refuse. I walked out snot-faced and grinning because somewhere in my chest a knot had loosened and wasn't in a hurry to tighten back. Physical readiness test came in a slap of wind sit-ups, push-ups, and that run that put the taste of pennies in your mouth. I ran with my jaw set and thought of my father counting out plays under the porch light for my brothers. At the halfway mark, Petty Officer Kim jogged alongside for a breath. Why are you here, Holstead? She said without looking at me. To be useful, I said. She nodded. Then B. Finish. I finished. I wasn't fast. I wasn't last. I was the exact kind of steady you can build a day on. Battle Stations 21 came at the end like a puzzle box. The ship-shaped building swallowed us past midnight. We fought simulated fires, stemmed a flooding compartment with shoring that flexed when we breathed wrong, carried a casualty up ladders that suddenly felt like mountains. Every scenario had a place for your hands if you put your pride down long enough to find it. When it was over, they placed a Navy ball cap in my hands, the one that meant recruit no more. The brim felt like something earned. We stood at parade rest in the pre-dawn. The lake breathed fog over the black water. Chief Rangel walked the line and spoke quiet enough that you had to lean with your hearing. You belong to something bigger than the argument you brought from home, he said. Remember that when the argument shows up in your head. It would. I knew that. But I also knew this silence had grown teeth in me, not the giving up kind, the enduring kind. The kind that waits and works and lets the day stack proof on proof. I didn't need to tell my father anything. One day, something would. We were dismissed, and I wrote Mom another letter before lights out. I told her about the lake, about the cap, about the way my hands had finally stopped shaking even when the whistle blew. I signed it, Love Sarah, and left the space under it blank. I had all the words I needed. None of them were for him. The first time I felt a ship breathe, it was the USS Baton easing off the pier in Norfolk while gulls argued over a French fry. Steel has a sound when it moves deep, impatient like an old animal shifting in its sleep. We slid past the brown water, and the cranes like awkward dinosaurs, and I stood on the weather deck with salt on my lips and a nervous flutter I pretended was hunger. Baton was a city that carried its own roads, the well deck for LCACs, and AAV's hangars for rotor blades, like folded dragonfly wings, berthing stacked with racks 3 high and curtains that didn't keep much sound in. On the mess line, you could tell time by the eggs, wet at 0500, tired at 0830, gone by 9. The air carried coffee diesel and that particular tang of paint that never really dries at sea. I learned the ship the way you learn a neighborhood. One smell, one clang, one stubborn hatch at a time. I started in supply, the place where everything either begins or ends. If it fed, fueled, or fixed anything, we touched it. Petty Officer First Class, Gaines, New Orleans drawl. Saint's tattoo showed me how the paper world attached to the real one. You'll think you're fighting forms, he said, but you're fighting time. Beat time, the mission runs. Lose, we eat cold beans. In the Gulf of Aden, 2009, the sea stretched out like a sheet slapped flat. We were a long steel argument no one wanted to have, but everyone respected. Pirates had been busy that year. Our job was presence first, then help if someone called for it. Long nights left the skin under my eyes thin. On watch, the bridge wore red lights and voices stayed low. Outside, the wind had teeth. I liked the late watches. The ship's heartbeat set a cadence you could think in. I tracked numbers that became meals and miles and sometimes relief. My hands knew the groove of the keyboard. My ears learned the different pitches of boots. Marines moved like cats. Blue shirts like drummers. Pilots like men with places to be. The first fire drill ran on a Tuesday we'd already lost count of. The alarms, ship-wide clang, banged around the bulkheads until it found your bones. This is a drill! This is a drill! Heat suits came out. We ran hoses through corridors that suddenly felt narrow. Smoke generator did its best to trick a sweet, acrid sting that grabbed your throat and asked dumb questions. I rounded a corner to find Seaman Ruiz, 19, and already apologizing with his eyes frozen with a nozzle in his hands. Eyes on me, I said. We move together. You don't have to be brave. You have to be here. He nodded once barely, and the hose found its path. At the debrief, nobody clapped. Nobody high-fived. Chief just marked our time, nodded at the clean lines on the deck and said, "Do it again." Respect comes quiet on ships. It's in who shows up to coil the hose without being asked. Mail drops felt like holidays invented to save morale. One day in August, we took on pallets while the sea slopped friendly for once. I got an envelope thick with my mother's script and a recipe for peach cobbler I could practically smell through the paper. Tucked behind it, a note. He's proud in his way. He just doesn't know how to aim it. I folded the paper back around those words like they were the only things keeping it warm. I called home when Liberty shook loose in Bahrain for a day, hot wind, brighter sun market stalls, hanging with rugs like poured paint. The USO phone crackled. Mom answered on the first ring, said my name like she'd been holding her breath. We talked about nothing. Church bake sale, Mrs. Mercier's hip, the Odessa High Band trying a new halftime show. When Dad's voice came on, the connection sharpened, like it recognized him. "How's your cruise?" he said, as if I were on the majesty of the seas. "It's a deployment, Dad." "Sure. Must be nice to see the world on the taxpayer's dime." "I'm working." "Uh-huh. Stay safe." The line popped and he was gone. He had turned into a kind of weather something you plan for but don't control. We ran drills for man overboard until our muscles did the right thing before our minds finished the sentence. We took on Marines and watched the flight deck come alive. CH-53 rotors, beating the sky down Ospreys, turning the air into a problem to be solved. You learn to keep your head on a swivel and your mouth shut around grit. Night ops looked like a distant storm, flashes, silhouettes, hand signals that said now without saying anything. I found small mercies. The ship's chapel held a piece you could hear. Chaplain McRae's sermons weren't fancy. Be where your boots are, he said one Sunday. God shows up there. I wasn't religious in any way that fit a box, but I sat in the back and let someone else tell me steady was a virtue. The day the shipboard fire stopped being a drill, we were 42 minutes from lunch. It started in a space where things had the decency to usually stay cool. Alarms stole the quiet, and the smell was wrong immediately. Oily, hot, loud. We snapped into the practice dance. Gaines barked numbers. I ran. Ruiz didn't freeze this time. He planted his feet and made the water go where it needed to. After in the passageway, he leaned his helmet against the bulkhead and grinned a sheepish grin. Didn't think today was the day, he said. Every day is the day, I said, and clapped his shoulder. He carried that one around for a while, handed it back to me years later when I needed it. Ports blurred Rhoda's blue tiles. Jebel Ali's heat you could push with your hand. I bought a cheap bracelet for Mom and a coil of silence for me. In a cafe that smelled like cardamom, a Marine captain asked what I was reading. I pointed to a dog-eared manual and said, "My future." He laughed. "You a lifer, I said I was a usefuler." He said that wasn't a word. I said it was the right idea. My brothers emailed from Odessa. Mark sent photos of truck beds loaded with plywood and beer. David wrote, "He brags about us at the VFW. Says you're seeing the world." I typed back, "I'm seeing the inside of a storeroom and a lot of sea." I didn't hit send. I learned the value of unmailed honesty. I got faster at the job, not because anyone was watching, but because missions seemed to go smoother when I made a spreadsheet breathe. You can't prove that, but you feel it, the difference between almost and on time. Chiefs notice. They don't say much. They ask your name when they already know it and then pretend they just learned it. One night somewhere between here and nowhere, I stood on the sponson and looked at a horizon that refused to admit it had an end. The ship moved through the dark like a calm decision. I thought of Odessa's flat streets and my father's porch light. I pictured him at the VFW polishing a story until it shone the way he wanted. I tried to make room for the man who carried ghosts, so I didn't have to. I also made room for the woman who was learning to carry herself. We came back to Norfolk with a skin of salt on everything. Families waved on the pier, posters, tears, small hands bouncing. I stood off to the side, duffel biting my shoulder, watching reunions happen like fireworks. You didn't have to be under them to feel the thump. Mom couldn't make the drive. She left a note with a neighbor I made the cobbler. "It's in your freezer. Love, Mom." No word from him. That was all right. I hadn't returned to be seen. I had returned to refill, retrain, and head out again. By then, I understood something the lake had started teaching me: revenge, if you can call it, that works best when it looks like competence held steady over years. Not a slam of the door, a series of doors you pass through because you've earned the right. The next one was waiting with sand and noise and a convoy that would test what quiet can do under fire. Afghanistan smelled like dust and diesel, and the sky never felt finished. I landed at Camp Leatherneck in Helmand Province, with a duffel heavier than my shoulders like to admit. Marines moved around me like they already knew the map rifles angled the same way faces set. My role wasn't to carry a rifle, not officially. I was there as a logistics and intel officer, the one who made sure beans, bullets, and fuel got where they needed to. Still in Helmand, everybody carried weight. Convoys rattled out daily lines of armored MRAPs, strung across roads carved out of clay. My desk was supposed to be a tent with laptops, radios, and a coffee pot that never worked, but paperwork had a way of bleeding into real dust. If a truck didn't get fuel, men didn't get back. Numbers on a screen became skin in the game faster than anyone stateside liked to admit. Captain Mark Rivera, a SEAL from San Antonio, had eyes that scanned faster than radar. He carried himself like the desert owed him nothing and gave him everything anyway. "Holstead," he said, "after we met your spreadsheets, keep us alive. Don't let anyone call them paper." His handshake was quick, strong, and already gone before I could reply. The ambush came on a stretch of road we'd driven a dozen times. Summer 2010. The kind of heat that made metals shimmer. I rode in the last truck of the convoy headset, crackling with chatter that sounded like routine. We'd cleared the route that morning. I remember thinking about Mom's cobbler recipe tucked in my bunk back at Leatherneck, how the peaches should be ripe in Odessa right about then. The first blast buckled the road 2 vehicles ahead, a column of dirt punching sky. The headset blew alive shouts, call signs static that felt like teeth on metal. The second blast caught the lead truck, lifted it sideways, slammed it down like a toy. Dust swallowed everything. My driver yelled IEDs I already knew. Gunfire cracked from the ridge, sharp controlled bursts. Insurgents had waited for this exact choke point. My chest tightened, but my head stayed clear. Training finds you when panic tries to. I dropped onto the comms. All stations, this is Holstead. Lock cordon east. QRF on channel 3. Dust off birds now. Rivera's voice cut through calm, but fast. Commander, we're taking fire from the ridge. Need eyes up. I pulled satellite imagery, overlaid our grid, and fed coordinates back. Ridge 5-7, smoke at bearing 1-5. Marking now. My hands didn't shake. Later, I'd wonder why. Rounds pinged off armor, metallic curses in the air. Marines dismounted, forming lines, rifles answering sharp. One truck burned, black smoke twisting. Casualty reports came, staggered, clipped. I kept the net clear, shoving emotion into a box I'd open later. Birds inbound, 5 mics out, I called. Hold your sectors. Rivera, again louder this time. Holstead, you see my left flank. I've got you. Reinforce north. You've got cover 3 meters ahead. He didn't ask how I knew. He moved. Minutes felt like nails dragged slow. Then the thump of rotors carved the sky dust storms of salvation. Cobras rolled in first, spitting fire into the ridge. The gun line stuttered, then thinned. Medevac birds dropped low. Crews fast roping with practiced fury. Through it all, my father's voice from years ago pressed at the edges. Uniforms no place for girls. You'll just be in the way. The irony was bitter enough to taste. Here I was, knees pressed to steel headset, slick with sweat, making calls that drew the line between men living and men not. The ridge fell quiet, just the pop of secondary fires, the groan of wounded metal. I counted trucks' names, checked them twice. We lost 2 men that day. Too many, but not the whole convoy. It could have been all of us. When we rolled back into Leatherneck, at dusk, the sun bled red into sand, painting everything the color of memory. My uniform smelled of smoke and fear, my throat raw from shouting. Rivera found me at the CP. His face was dust-streaked helmet tucked under his arm. He didn't say much. SEALs don't waste words, but he looked me dead in the eye. You kept us alive, he said. Period. I tried to shrug it off. Just doing the job. He shook his head. Don't undersell it, Commander. We all know who called the plays. Then he walked off, leaving the weight of his words heavier than my pack. I went to my bunk that night, pulled out Mom's recipe card, the one smudged from her hands. My eyes blurred on the line about nutmeg. For the first time since Great Lakes, I let myself cry silent and short. Not for me, but for the men we zipped into bags, for the ones who would call home with their voices still intact. When I closed my eyes, I didn't hear my father's smirk. I heard rotor blades and Rivera's voice steady and certain. You kept us alive. That stayed with me longer than any medal they pinned later. Medals gather dust. Words like that echo. Norfolk smelled like salt and jet fuel when I stepped off the C-17. We'd been in the air so long, my boots felt like they'd fused to the deck. A band of families waited beyond the rope line, waving posters, waving babies, waving anything that caught light. Their voices carried a tide of names shouted into the hangar. I stood back, duffel cutting into my shoulder, watching the reunions burst like fireworks. That kind of joy belongs to everyone in the room, even if no one's holding a sign for you. When my turn came, I signed the clipboard, turned in my weapon, and walked into the thin Virginia sunlight. The sky was softer than Hellman's. I breathed it in like medicine. I called Mom from a payphone outside the gate, the kind with a sticky receiver and numbers rubbed half off. She answered like she'd been holding the phone all morning. Sarah, she said, and I could hear the tears she was trying to swallow. We talked about little things, her tomatoes, the neighbor's dog, the grocery store, adding a new aisle. Nothing about Afghanistan. She knew better than to ask, and I wasn't ready to answer. Dad didn't get on the line. I asked once. She hesitated. He's at the VFW, honey. Of course he was. I stayed in Norfolk a while, caught up on paperwork, work supply for the carrier group cycling in and out. I kept my head down, did my job, train new sailors. The tempo was different, but the silence inside me stayed steady. When leave opened, I bought a Greyhound ticket to Odessa. I thought maybe he'd look at me different this time. The bus rolled across Texas. Hours of flat horizon and pump jacks bowing to no one. We hit Odessa at dawn, the sky streaked orange over the refinery stacks. Mom met me at the station in her Buick. She hugged me too long, the way only mothers can. Her hair smelled like the same suave shampoo I remembered from childhood. The house hadn't changed. Same porch swing, creaking, same flag out front. Inside the recliner, where Dad held court like a general, still faced the TV. He wasn't in it yet. At supper that night, the table was heavy with brisket potatoes and hush puppies. My brothers Mark and David were there, louder than the food deserved. They'd filled out beards, sunburns, hands rough from construction work. Dad sat at the head, silver hair-clipped, neat voice, carrying like always. He asked Mark about the oil field. Running strong, Dad. Paycheck's good. He asked David about his roofing crew. We're booked solid through September. He sipped sweet tea, nodded, smiled. When the silence landed, I thought maybe he'd turn to me. He didn't. He cut another slice of brisket and said, Sarah's been seeing the world. Must be nice. I swallowed, put my fork down. It's not vacation, Dad. I've been working. He didn't look up. Paperwork's work, sure. My brothers chuckled. Not cruel, just following his lead. Mom pressed her napkin, flat eyes on her plate. I wanted to tell him about the ridge in Helmand, about Rivera's voice in my headset, about the lives counted and recounted until the number stopped changing. Instead, I said nothing. Silence was still my sharpest tool. Sunday, we went to Church First Baptist on Sam Houston. Folks shook my hand in the foyer. So proud of you, Sarah. Your daddy must be over the moon. I smiled, nodded, said thank you. He stood beside me, chest out, accepting the compliments like they were meant for him. When someone asked what I did, he cut in before I could answer. Oh, she pushes papers. Pretty good at it, though. Their smiles faltered. My own froze. That was the way of things. He defined the story before it left my mouth. Later, at the VFW, I watched him hold court with men his age. He told a story about Hugh, about holding a line under mortar fire. They listened like he was the last man alive who remembered. Then someone asked, and your girl, Frank, she's Navy, right? He waved a hand. Yeah, just a prop for the guys. They need pretty faces in the ranks these days. The laugh rolled easy around the table. My chest tightened. I stood by the dartboard drink, sweating in my hand, and reminded myself I didn't owe him the truth, not yet. I walked home that night under the big West Texas sky, the stars sharp enough to cut. Every porch light looked the same, but none of them belonged to me. On the bus back to Norfolk, I watched the land unroll mile after mile. The silence grew heavier, but not weaker. It was becoming something else, something solid. I thought of Rivera's words. You kept us alive, period. That was enough for now. But I knew the day would come when silence would no longer be private. It would walk into a room full of people, stand taller than his smirk, and show itself. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. But I carried the certainty like a packed sea bag, heavy, necessary mine. The Veterans Gala came around every 4th of July weekend. The one night Odessa's VFW hall felt less like a smoky bar and more like the center of the world. Banners hung crooked, but proud stars and stripes bunting, draped over folding tables, the smell of brisket and potato salad clinging to the air. Folks wore their best bolo ties, pearl snap shirts, dresses bought for Easter Sunday, but pressed again for this. I came in my dress blues collar, stiff shoes shining, not because I thought anyone here would notice the polish, but because I needed to feel like I wasn't shrinking when I walked through the door. Mom fussed over my hair in the Buick before we went in. You look beautiful, honey, she whispered, as if saying it out loud would break something fragile. Dad was already inside, posted at the head table like a man guarding old territory. Colonel Frank Holstead, 82nd Airborne, his silver star pinned to a jacket that barely fit anymore. He shook hands, told jokes, slapped backs. Every laugh that followed felt like a cue line rehearsed over decades. My brothers stood nearby, proud satellites orbiting his gravity. When we walked in, heads turned. A few folks clapped, others whispered. I caught fragments. Commander Holstead, right, she's back from overseas. For a breath, I thought maybe the night would tilt different. Then I passed by his table. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, that same old half grin tugging at his mouth. Just a prop for the guys, he said loud enough for the two men beside him to hear. They chuckled, not because it was funny, but because agreeing with Frank Holstead was easier than disagreeing. The words landed like they always had, but this time the room felt them too. I saw one man frown, shifting uncomfortably. Another raised an eyebrow as if wondering why he'd said it. My throat tightened, but I kept walking. My heels clicked sharp against the wood floor, each step measured, controlled. At the buffet line, Mrs. Simmons, widow of a Korean War vet, touched my arm. Don't let him steal your shine, child, she whispered. Her hand was cool, her eyes steady. I nodded, grateful, and loaded brisket on my plate. I sat with Mom halfway down the hall. She pushed food around her plate, eyes darting toward Dad's table. He doesn't mean it, she murmured. It's just his way. His way's been the same for 30 years, I said softly, and it's always aimed the same direction. The program started Pledge of Allegiance prayer, the mayor fumbling through a speech about sacrifice. Old photos scrolled on a projector, young men with rifles, women in factory lines, faces that had built the ground we stood on. Every name drew applause. Every face deserved it. Then the microphone passed to Dad. He rose, slow, deliberate, letting the room hush for him. His voice filled the hall like it had filled our house when I was a girl. He spoke of valor, of brothers lost in Vietnam, of what it meant to carry the weight of duty. Folks nodded. Some dabbed their eyes. He was good at this, wrapping history around himself like a flag. And then he paused, eyes scanning the room, landing on me. Of course, he said, these days, they'll hand a uniform to anyone. Need a few props for the guys, I guess. He smirked, and laughter, uneasy but present, rippled across the hall. My stomach clenched. My hands gripped my knees under the table. Mom flinched, looking down. I didn't move, didn't rise, didn't answer. Not yet. Because deep inside, under the burn, under the ache, something steadier whispered, wait, your time's coming. The program rolled on awards for service plaques, for community donors, a raffle for a shotgun some rancher donated. The hum of conversation swelled as folks ate, laughed, swapped stories. Dad worked the room like he owned it, every nod a reinforcement of his legend. But under it all, I felt a different current building. Not in me, but in the air itself. The kind of stillness right before a storm decides to break. And when it did, it wouldn't be me speaking. It would be the truth walking through that door. The first tremor ran through the ceiling tiles like a distant train. It was July hot. Outside, even with the sun down, the kind of heat that makes a window unit give up. Inside the VFW hall, the air hung thick with brisket smoke, and cologne forks tapped plates, and some old Hank Williams tune wheezed from a speaker near the bar. Then the windows rattled. Someone at the back said, "What in the world?" And a kid clapped his hands over his ears. Another rumble closer. Napkins fluttered the bunting over the doorway, lifted and fell. The sound rose into a hard chop that reached right into your ribs. Helicopter. Conversation stalled. Heads swiveled. Men in ball caps leaned toward the glass like they might see through 50 years, and a layer of grime if they squinted hard enough. I stayed seated, spine straight, hands folded around the cool edge of my plate. My pulse kicked once, then found the slow beat I trusted. The doors blew open on a gust that tasted like dust and jet fuel. A man filled the frame, tall, squared cover tucked under one arm, sand on his shoulders, like he'd carried the desert in with him. The hall took a breath and held it. Commander Holstead. His voice cut clean across the clatter and stopped it. We need you. Now. Mark Rivera. San Antonio drawl riding under navy steel. I hadn't seen him since leatherneck dust on his face, 2 fingers tapping my shoulder as if to say, "Don't forget what you did here." In Odessa, he looked like a verdict. Chairs scraped back. Folks craned. The mayor blinked, mouth open, as if someone had skipped his place in the program. Dad at the head table went very still. His fingers slid on his glass. The ice clinked against the side with a sound that felt too loud. He put the glass down and missed the edge by an inch. Whiskey bled into the white tablecloth, a stain spreading like a map. For a second, I didn't move. Not because I doubted what to do, but because the room was changing shape, and I wanted to feel it happen. You can tell when a ship turns by the way your feet adjust before your brain does. This was that. I pushed back my chair and stood. My knees didn't wobble. The meat of the moment wasn't in standing. It was in how I stood, deliberate, unhurried, the same way I'd stood when a convoy counted on my voice. I smoothed my jacket, felt the weight of the buttons, and stepped into the aisle. Rivera was already moving toward me, boots thumping a steady rhythm on the wood. People leaned away to make a path the way they do when water finds the low place. He stopped 2 steps short, gave me that quick nod that means we're on the same side of the problem. Up close, I could see lines of travel around his eyes, and a day's stubble he hadn't had time to bother with. "I tried your phone," he said low enough that it was for me alone. "Would have sent the entire jag if I could have. We've got a birds and fuel snarl in Norfolk and numbers I trust with our skins. I need your hands, Commander." My phone was zipped in my purse beside a packet of breath mints and a grocery receipt Mom insisted I keep for couponing. I didn't ask how he found me. If you do the kind of work that matters, the Navy finds you where you are. Behind me, chairs squeaked. The hall was not quiet. It was listening. I could feel the shape of Dad's stare on the side of my face. It used to make me smaller. It wasn't doing that tonight. "Understood," I said. "Give me 60 seconds. 30, Rivera said not unkindly. I turned to Mom. She was already on her feet, one hand at her throat, the other on the back of her chair, like it could steady the rest of her. "Go," she whispered. Tears stood in the corners of her eyes but didn't fall. "I knew it'd be you." I nodded. I didn't look at my father yet. I wasn't avoiding him, so much as refusing to let him have the first frame of this picture. My brothers stood side by side, eyes wide, chins lifted like they were expecting a punch. Mark's lips parted a question that didn't find its words. David took his cap off and held it against his chest without seeming to realize. I stepped out into the open between the tables and the small stage where the mayor had kept his note cards. The floorboards under me had a little give. You can feel that kind of give in a ship's deck, too, wood or steel, all of it humans asking the world to hold them for a minute longer. Rivera adjusted his cover, slid it on. He didn't salute indoors, no cover required, but his shoulders did something that might have been more honest than a salute. The hall watched every inch of it. "Commander Holstead," he said, "for the room this time, not just me. We're wheels up in 5. We need your head on a problem only you have the map for." If he'd said it flowery, it would have cheapened it. He just spoke it plain. West Texas respects plain. I didn't give a speech. I didn't owe one. I set my purse on the mayor's podium, took out my keys, slid them into Mom's palm. "Back door," I said. She nodded like we'd rehearsed. Then I turned and faced the room. Faces upturned that had watched me trail my father down Grant Street in a hand-me-down dress. Faces that had clapped for him when I was too small to see over the people in front of me. Mr. Earl Simmons's empty chair in the corner had a spray of fake carnations in a jar. His widow stood beside it in a blue dress she'd ironed too carefully. She lifted her chin at me, a tiny defiant salute of her own. I looked past them finally to my father. His mouth was a line I'd seen 100 times, the line he made when a story wasn't going the way he intended. A drop of whiskey fell off the table edge and darkened the toe of his boot. He didn't dab at the stain on the cloth. He didn't move at all. His eyes were on me, but not like a rifle sight. More like a man realizing the ground wasn't as flat as he'd been walking on all these years. I held his gaze for one breath, then let it go. This night wasn't a verdict rendered by him or about him. It wasn't revenge in the storybook sense. It was a door being opened by something bigger than both of us. Then the room stood. It wasn't all at once. It was a ripple, a pew-to-pew church kind of rising. First the old men who had to brace a hand on the table, then the ones with canes. Younger folks followed all at once, remembering they were in a hall for veterans, and that sometimes the right thing is obvious. A couple of teenagers in leather jackets looked at everyone else and scrambled up cheeks pink. Hats came off hands, went to brows, fingers found seams. The air shifted as if it finally had enough room in it. I didn't cry. Not because I was trying to be hard, but because the moment didn't require tears. It required presence. Rivera stepped half aside, as if to say after you. I moved forward, and the tide made space chairs, pushed in voices, gone to a hush that felt like weather after a front. Phones slipped out of pockets, a few flashes popped, but mostly people just watched, with their hands held where a salute lives when you're not using it. Dad did not stand. His eyes blinked once slow. Mark, my brother, touched his arm. He didn't move. David whispered something I couldn't hear. He didn't move. The world had shifted under him, and he was testing whether staying put might put it back where it had been. It didn't. I passed within 2 feet of his chair. The whiff of whiskey and Old Spice and the house I grew up in hit me like a memory you didn't ask for. I could have stopped. I could have said any number of things, some kind, some not. I didn't. Because sometimes the truest sentence is your boots on a floor moving toward work that needs doing. We hit the door, and the July heat leaned in close. Outside, rotor wash tore at the gravel and lifted paper plates that had escaped the trash. The helicopter thumped at the field's edge door's open crew chief, giving us the kind of wave that says everything without one wasted word. I climbed in. Rivera followed. The crew chief hammered the latch home, gave a thumbs up. Through the open hall doors, I saw the movement inside settle into a single picture, a room on its feet, faces, bright hands, still at brows. And at the head table, the one man sitting. The helo lifted light as a promise, and Odessa shrank the way towns do when seen from the perspective of the work ahead. I put on the headset. Rivera pointed at a folder strapped to the bulkhead, mouthed, "Fuel math's a mess." I nodded, pulled the strap, and opened to a page I understood. When the ground fell away, something else did too. I didn't know if it was anger or grief or the rope I'd been hauling for 30 years. The noise took it. The sky kept it. I checked the numbers and started speaking the language that had saved men before and would save them again. Back inside the VFW, in a silence that would not be loud for a long time, my father stared at an empty doorway, like it might eventually look back. The helicopter beat a hole in the night all the way to Norfolk. Rivera slid a folder across our knees, fuel tables, flight schedules, stacked wrong tankers, short crews timing out. 2 carrier groups arguing over the same hose, he said into the headset. The crew chief watched our hands like he could read the math from our fingers. I anchored myself in what I knew, numbers timing how steel and people move when you take the friction out. I scratched on a kneeboard, while rotor wash shoved the world backward. Cross-level JP5 off Pier 12 now. Shift V22s to the far loop. Put the C2s on a quiet pad and backfill with helos for the night hops. If we stagger the pre-flight checks by 20 minutes, nobody sits dry. Rivera nodded before I finished. Make the calls, he said. I did. By the time we set down, the flight line already sounded different. Less shouting, more motion. A chief with salt in his mustache met us at the hangar door phone to his ear chin, going up and down hard. "Whoever's on your end just bought us daylight," he said when he hung up. He didn't ask my rank. He didn't need to. Results outrank everything. We pushed past midnight. Rotors turned, tankers rolled, one by one the jams unclenched. Rivera clapped my shoulder once and left his hand there, a heartbeat longer than habit. That's the work, he said. He didn't say good job. He didn't need to. The music of things moving right said it for him. At Oral 400, a petty officer handed me a styrofoam cup of coffee strong enough to stand up in. My phone buzzed in my pocket, 2 messages and a missed call from Mom. One photo came through the VFW hall doors. open to the night people on their feet, hands to brows. The caption was just a line she'd typed, slow. They stood so long, the coffee went cold. The second photo was the head table. You could see the stain on the cloth where the whiskey had bled. You could see my father's boot. The chair under him looked too small for a man that size. I slid the phone back into my pocket and went back to work. Morning burned off the fog over the river. By noon, the logjam was a memory we didn't trust yet. That's the thing about crises. They leave echoes that make you look over your shoulder for a while. Rivera signed the last page with a short stroke, then looked up like sunlight had found him. Go sleep, he said. You've earned it. I slept an hour on a bench in an office that smelled like coffee and hydraulic fluid. When I woke, the news had already crawled across more screens than I wanted it to. Somebody at the Gala had filmed the moment the room rose. The Odessa American put it on their site with a grainy still and a headline that made my throat tight. Town stands for commander. Father does not. I didn't read the comments. I didn't need anyone else to translate what I'd already lived. 2 days later, Mom called when she knew I'd be on break. He hasn't said a word, she whispered. Walks the yard, sits in the recliner, won't go to the hall. She paused. The Simmons boy came by with a casserole. Said the men are thinking. You know how they are when they're thinking. How are you? I asked. I'm making peach cobbler, she said. And that was her way of telling me she'd survived this part like she survived the others. I didn't fly back to Odessa. I stayed where the Navy had its hands full and did what I've always done, made the trains run on time so the right people could make the right kind of noise. Dignity sits well with work. Weeks later, an envelope came through official channels with a dry citation that didn't capture anything that mattered, phrases about exceptional coordination under pressure lines that belong in binders. I folded it once and put it in my locker behind the packet of Mom's recipes. Paper has a place. So do memories that don't ask for framing. In September, I took leave and drove west alone. The land flattened out and the sky got bigger with every mile. Odessa waited like a stubborn old friend. The VFW sign clicked and buzzed over an empty lot at noon. I parked in front of our house and sat there until the engine ticked itself quiet. Dad was on the porch. He looked like a man reckoning with an unpaid bill. He didn't stand. He nodded at the chair next to him like truce. I sat. We watched a mail truck crawl by. Somewhere a dog barked twice and changed its mind. The porch boards had the same give they'd always had. He cleared his throat. You busy? He asked. Most days, I said. He nodded. His hands, knuckled and scarred, lay flat on his knees. I was wrong, he said finally. It came out like a bolt that hadn't turned in a long time. He didn't dress it up. He didn't say sorry. He said wrong. And the word landed with more weight than any apology could have carried from him. We sat in that air a while, letting the word do its work. He reached under his chair and set a shoebox on the rail between us. Inside were the photographs I'd grown up with, boys in jungle greens, faces open, and too young a wedding picture where he and Mom both looked like they had time to spend a telegram with a crease I'd traced as a child. On top, he'd placed the Lexington postcard I'd bought in Corpus, the one I thought I'd hidden well enough. Found that cleaning out your closet, he said. Figured you'd want it back. I do, I said, and didn't try to keep the crack out of my voice. He stared at the yard like it had a map only he could see. When that man walked in the hall, he said, I thought he stopped, tried again. I didn't think you were the person the room stood for. He breathed out through his nose. Turns out the room was smarter than me. I didn't reach for his hand. He didn't reach for mine. We let the space between us stay the right size. I won't ask you to stand, I said finally. Not for me. Not now. Not ever. He nodded, eyes shining just enough to make me look at the street. You don't have to, he said. The standing's done. We sat until the sun slid behind the cottonwoods and the porch light came on by itself. When I rose to go, he cleared his throat again. Commander, he said, and the title sounded strange and correct coming out of him. Keep doing what you do. That's the plan, I said. Mom hugged me at the door and slipped a warm foil pan into my hands. Peach cobbler, of course. On the counter, a clipping from the Odessa American lay under a magnet shaped like Texas. Someone had circled the headline in blue pen. I didn't ask who. Back in Norfolk, I pinned the postcard above my rack where I'd see it when I laced my boots. I kept working. A war doesn't stop for one good night in a VFW hall. Neither does a life. The story folks in Odessa told changed a little, and that was enough. The last part, the private part between a daughter and a father, kept on in its slow, stubborn way, like a pump jack bowing to earth and pulling up what it can. People sometimes ask if I ever said anything to him about that night. I tell them the truth, I didn't have to. A whole town said it better than I ever could. Crowd stood, blood sat. That was the sentence we both had to learn to live in. If you're listening to this, with someone in mind, a daughter, a son, a friend who's worn a uniform or carried your hope, do me a favor. Tell them while they can hear it that the work they do counts. And if this story felt like your town, your hall, your porch, I'd be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs the reminder. If you want more stories like this, quiet, steady, a little salt, and a lot of truth, stick around with us. Thanksgiving dinner, I whispered under my breath, staring at the golden glow that spilled from the dining room windows. Inside, laughter rattled the walls, silverware clinked, and the smell of roast turkey filled the night air. Yet on the porch, wrapped in a thin sweater against the bitter November chill, sat my grandmother. Her plate of pumpkin pie had gone cold, untouched. The whipped cream melted into a sad puddle. I asked why she was out here, alone. They smirked, their voices sharp enough to cut. She stinks too much to sit with us. I spoke 4 words, and they started screaming. I hadn't planned to come home that year. Duty called elsewhere. My unit had just rotated back from overseas, and I thought I'd spend Thanksgiving quietly in the barracks. But something pulled me home. Some ache in my chest that said, go see her. Go see Grandma. She was the reason I joined the military in the first place. She had served before me, long before my generation even knew what service meant. The stories of her grit, her medals tucked in boxes that no one else bothered to open, those were the sparks that lit my fire. So I drove through the crisp autumn air, leaves like dying embers swirling across the highway, thinking of the smell of her kitchen, the scratch of her voice when she used to sing old hymns while cooking. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I pulled into that driveway. The house looked the same, warm light, wreaths on the door, laughter spilling into the night. But my grandmother didn't belong to that glow anymore. She was shunted outside, left with the cold. Grandma, I whispered, my boots crunching on the porch steps. She looked up, her eyes cloudy, unfocused. Time had softened her mind. She forgot names, dates, sometimes even where she was. But her smile lit up the second she saw me. You came home, she said, voice trembling. I knew you would. I hugged her, felt how frail she'd become. Her body, once sturdy and unshakable, had shrunk inside her clothes. The cold gnawed at her bones, and still, no one thought to bring her inside. I stormed into the living room. Heat blasted my cheeks. Laughter drowned the faint hum of the old radio. My parents, my uncles, my cousins, they all turned, forks midair, wine glasses half raised. Why is she outside? My voice cracked like a rifle shot. Silence for a heartbeat. Then a shrug, a smirk from my uncle. She stinks too much. You know how she gets. Can't remember to wash, keeps repeating herself. She makes dinner awkward. So, out she goes. Out she goes, as if she were trash. I scanned the table, roast turkey steaming, cranberry sauce shining red, mashed potatoes carved smooth like snowdrifts. And every face at that table looked away from mine, ashamed but unwilling to admit it. The fury in my chest burned hot. Images flashed. Grandma counting her pension checks, sliding bills into envelopes so the mortgage could be paid. Grandma mending uniforms, folding laundry late at night, humming while everyone else slept. Grandma, the one who raised me when my parents were too busy, working, too tired to listen. And now, discarded, forgotten. I clenched my fists, my jaw tight. I wanted to shout, to flip the table, to drag them one by one to the porch to feel the cold air biting their skin. But rage alone wasn't enough. No, I needed words that would sear them. Words they would never forget. I walked back to the doorway. Grandma was still there, shivering. Her pie had started to sag, crust turning soggy in the chill. She didn't complain, not once. That was who she was, always enduring, always quiet. "Come on," I said softly. I guided her inside, ignoring the stares, the murmurs. Chairs scraped as I pulled one out for her. I set her plate in front of her, my hand steady, my face like stone. And then I looked at them, all of them. The people who owed their comfort, their warmth, their very existence to her sacrifices. I said 4 words. Words so sharp, so cold, they cut the laughter out of the room. And that's when they started screaming. The truth was, I'd been preparing for this moment all my life without realizing it. Every injustice I'd swallowed, every slight I'd endured as a soldier, every time someone underestimated me because I was a woman in uniform. All of it burned inside me now, and it fused with the fury I felt for her, my grandmother, the forgotten veteran, the discarded matriarch. I don't know if my parents ever expected me to sit quietly at that table, to let it pass like another awkward holiday, to shrug it off, but they should have known better. I wasn't raised to stay silent, not by her. And in that moment, standing there with the cold clinging to my coat and the weight of her trembling hand in mine, I swore they would regret her tears. I didn't say those 4 words yet, not out loud. They burned on my tongue, waiting for the perfect moment. Instead, I stood there at the threshold, staring at my family as they fumbled with their forks and napkins, pretending nothing was wrong. Grandma's chair scraped against the hardwood floor as I pulled it closer to the table. I settled her gently, wrapped a blanket over her thin shoulders, and kissed her cheek. Her cloudy eyes flickered with gratitude, though I could tell she wasn't fully present. That was the cruel trick her mind played now. Moments of clarity, like stars blinking through heavy cloud, then gone again. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't make a fuss, sweetheart. They don't understand." Her voice cracked with age, but I heard the same steel in it that had carried her through battles and hardships I could only imagine. I looked around that dining room, and for a second, the anger faded, replaced by memory. I saw a younger version of her, back in the kitchen of this same house, rolling out dough on the counter. I was 6 years old, standing on a stool beside her. "Keep your fingers curled under," she told me as I tried to slice apples with a dull paring knife. A soldier protects herself, even in the kitchen. She always called herself a soldier, never a veteran. To her, service didn't end when the uniform came off. When my parents' business struggled, it was her pension check that kept food in our fridge. She never reminded them of it, never asked for thanks. She just smiled, poured her own coffee into a chipped mug, and said, "That's what family does. We carry each other." I remember watching her polish her medals once. She thought I was asleep, but I peeked through the doorway. She had laid them all out on a towel, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, ribbons I couldn't name. Her hands shook slightly as she touched each one, eyes far away. Then she caught me watching, and instead of being embarrassed, she beckoned me closer. "See this one?" she asked, holding up a medal with a ribbon the color of deep red wine. "I didn't earn this for being brave. I earned it because I was scared, but I did what needed to be done anyway. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it." That sentence carved itself into my bones. It was the first time I thought, if she can do that, why can't I? When I told my parents I wanted to enlist, they scoffed. Dad laughed in my face. "You? You're a girl. The military's no place for you." Mom shook her head, already counting the ways I'd failed. But Grandma only squeezed my hand and said, "Go, and show them what I already see in you." So I did. I pushed myself through training, through mud and exhaustion, through the whispers of men who doubted me. Every time I wanted to give up, I remembered her voice. Every medal I earned, I laid at her bedside, the way she had once polished her own. We became mirrors of each other. Two women in uniforms too big for us, carrying burdens larger than our frames should have allowed. And yet, here she was, cast aside by the very children she had fed, clothed, and defended. My uncles were laughing over football scores. My father was carving turkey as if nothing were wrong. My mother poured wine, ignoring the frail woman on the porch. The bile rose in my throat. I wanted to shout, "Do you remember the years she skipped meals so you could eat? Do you remember her walking to double shifts with holes in her shoes? Do you remember that every dollar you spent in this house came from the military pension of the woman you now say smells too much to sit at your table?" But they didn't want to remember. Remembering would mean admitting they had abandoned her. So I sat beside Grandma, gently cutting her pie into small bites, guiding the fork to her lips. She chewed slowly, smiled at me, and whispered, "Still sweet." Inside, I watched my father laugh, watched my aunts gossip, watched my cousins snap photos for social media, documenting their perfect Thanksgiving without a hint of shame. I felt like a stranger in my own childhood home. The rage crept back in, stronger now, sharper. It wasn't just about Grandma being outside. It was about decades of sacrifice they had erased the moment she became inconvenient. It was about the way they had treated me the same way, praising my service only when it meant extra money, but dismissing me as soon as I came home with scars they couldn't see. I realized, standing there in that golden light, that they had mistaken patience for weakness. They thought Grandma's silence meant she had nothing left. They thought my silence meant I would fall in line. They were wrong. As I wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, I felt her frail fingers press against my wrist. Her cloudy eyes locked onto mine, clear for just an instant. "You're strong," she murmured. "Stronger than me." The words struck deeper than any bullet ever had. My throat tightened. I nodded, because anything I said would break me open. That night, I sat awake in my old room, listening to the muffled laughter through the floorboards. My hand rested on the scar that cut across my side, a scar I earned overseas. And I thought of her scars, the ones I had glimpsed years ago when she changed her blouse, pale lines across her shoulder and hip. She never spoke of how she got them. She never needed to. By the time dawn cracked the horizon, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just her granddaughter. I was her legacy. I was the proof that her sacrifices mattered. And if her own children couldn't see her worth, then I would make them. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, at the uniform folded neatly on my chair. I had worn it in deserts and jungles, in places my family could barely find on a map. I'd carried my unit through hell and brought them home, and today I would carry her. The anger in me had cooled into something sharper, steadier, like the edge of a blade. No more yelling, no more begging them to understand. This time, justice would not be a plea. It would be a reckoning. Thanksgiving had turned into a battlefield, and I knew which side I was on. The next morning, sunlight crept across the porch where she had sat the night before. The rocking chair swayed gently in the breeze, empty now, but the sight still cut me. I couldn't shake the image of her small frame, hunched against the cold, her plate of pumpkin pie forgotten. I brewed coffee in the old kitchen, the same chipped percolator she'd used for decades still sitting on the counter. Its burble filled the silence, and with it came memories of her younger years, stories she told me in fragments, stories my parents pretended never happened. Grandma was more than a kind old woman with fading memory. She had been a soldier long before I was. She was 20 when she first wore the uniform. I'd seen black and white photos, her hair pinned tight under a cap, her eyes fierce, posture unyielding. She wasn't just serving food in mess halls or typing in some back office. She was in the thick of it, carrying stretchers, pulling wounded men out of fire, patching them under the roar of artillery. "Bullets don't stop for women," she once told me, "so we don't stop for them either." Her stories weren't meant to glorify war. She told them with a quiet honesty, never seeking pity or applause. like the time she shielded a young private with her own body when shrapnel exploded nearby. She still bore the scar across her shoulder, though she hid it beneath sweaters. Or the night her unit was ambushed, and she held a flashlight between her teeth while stitching a soldier's torn leg, refusing to let him bleed out in the dirt. "That medal," she once said, tapping a bronze star in her dresser drawer, "belongs to the boys I dragged out alive, not to me." Her humility burned in me deeper than pride ever could. She didn't serve for glory. She served because it was the right thing to do. After the war, she returned to this very house. There were no parades, no banners, just bills to pay, mouths to feed. My grandfather died young, so she carried the weight alone. Her pension check, the one she fought for in uniform, became the lifeline for the family. She took jobs wherever she could, waitressing, cleaning, even sewing uniforms for the very army that had once been hers. Every corner of this house carries her fingerprints. The patched roof she paid for, the hardwood floors she refinished herself, the hand-stitched curtains still swaying in the windows. She built this home not just with money, but with her back, her hands, her sweat. And yet, to my family, she was just old, just forgetful, just in the way. I remembered one winter when the power went out, snow piled high outside, the house freezing. My parents panicked about food spoiling. Grandma stayed calm. She lit candles, pulled canned goods from the pantry, and boiled water in the fireplace. We sat around her, listening to her stories, while outside the storm raged. She turned disaster into memory, fear into warmth. How quickly they forgot. As the coffee bubbled, I looked at her framed photo on the wall. She was young again in that picture, standing with her platoon. Her hand rested on the shoulder of a soldier, barely out of boyhood. They all wore the same expression, weary but unbroken. I whispered to the photo, "I won't let them erase you." Footsteps creaked behind me. My father entered, yawning, scratching his head. He barely looked at me before pouring himself a mug. "You shouldn't get so worked up," he muttered, as if reading my thoughts. "She's old. She doesn't know what's going on half the time. Better to keep her out of sight than confuse her." I slammed the percolator down harder than I meant to. The sound rang sharp. Out of sight? That woman gave everything for this family, for this country, and you shove her onto a porch like garbage. He winced, but only for a second. "Don't be dramatic. We do what we can, but she's difficult." "Difficult?" My voice rose. "She carried this family alone for years. Without her pension, you wouldn't even have this house. Without her sacrifice, you wouldn't be here to call her difficult." His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. He walked away, coffee in hand, leaving silence in his wake. I sat down at the table, head in my hands. For years, I had thought my service would make them proud, that maybe they'd finally see me the way Grandma always had. But watching their indifference toward her, I realized pride wasn't what they were built on. They were built on taking, on pretending the sacrifices of others didn't exist. Grandma shuffled in a few minutes later, her blanket still around her shoulders. She moved slow, but her eyes were bright. She looked at me, confused. "Why are you sad, sweetheart?" I shook my head quickly, wiping my eyes, just thinking about things. She patted my cheek with a shaky hand. "Don't cry. Soldiers don't cry." But her own eyes glistened. I knew she wasn't talking about me. She was talking about herself, about all the nights she cried silently, so no one else would hear. I held her hand. "Grandma, they don't see you. Not the way they should. But I do. And I'll make them." She smiled faintly. "Always, my brave girl." In that moment, I felt her strength settle in my bones, her resilience, her humility, her love, woven into me like blood, like breath. She had been a soldier and a mother, but above all, she was the heart that had kept us alive. And I knew with a soldier's certainty, I wouldn't let her legacy fade into the shadows. Not while I had a voice, not while I had her blood running through my veins. I wasn't just her granddaughter, I was her continuation. And soon, they would understand that. The morning after Thanksgiving should have been filled with the smell of leftover turkey sandwiches, pies reheated in the oven, and lazy conversations around the table. That's how I remembered it as a child. Grandma humming while she carved up turkey for us, my cousins fighting over the wishbone, my father pretending to complain about football, but watching anyway. But this year, the house was different. It was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled television in the living room. The laughter was gone. My parents spoke in low, irritated voices as they cleaned up, and Grandma sat at the kitchen table, staring at the salt shaker like it held some great secret. She had forgotten to put it away, maybe. Or maybe she'd simply forgotten what she was doing. She reached for it once, then stopped mid-motion, her hand trembling before she set it back down. I watched her shoulders curl inward as if the weight of confusion were pressing down on her spine. When I was little, I used to sit on that same kitchen chair while she braided my hair for school. Her fingers were quick, confident, never missing a strand. Now, those same hands fumbled over the salt shaker like it was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "Need help, Grandma?" I asked gently. She blinked at me. "Oh, sugar. What was I doing?" "You were making coffee," I said, "and you wanted the sugar." Her lips formed a small, "Oh," and she smiled, as if I had just told her the punchline of a joke. "That's right, coffee." But behind her smile was something else, something fragile, like glass about to crack. That was the cruelest part of the disease, the way it let her know, for fleeting moments, that she was losing herself. Imagine being a soldier who once commanded men in the field, who once stitched up bleeding wounds with nothing but a needle and grit, now reduced to forgetting the name of the granddaughter she raised. My cousins wandered in, bleary-eyed from staying up late. One of them wrinkled his nose. "Ugh, she's still in here?" I shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "She lives here, remember?" He rolled his eyes and muttered, "Not for long," before grabbing a soda and disappearing. I froze. Not for long? I walked into the living room. My father and uncle were sitting on the couch, talking in hushed tones, but I caught fragments. "Can't keep this up forever. The bills. We're stretched thin. Why, that pension won't last. Not with her forgetting things. But maybe a home, a facility. Safer for her. Better for us." Better for us. The words hit like a slap. The pension, that steady little check she got every month, had kept the lights on through my childhood. It had paid for my school lunches, my cleats for soccer, even the down payment on the roof above their heads. And now, because she sometimes forgot where she left her glasses, they wanted her gone. I stood in the doorway until my father noticed me. His jaw tightened, but he didn't stop. He looked me dead in the eye, as if daring me to challenge him. "We've decided it's best if Mom goes into a home," he said flatly. "You're a soldier. You know what discipline looks like. You understand hard choices." I laughed bitterly. Hard choices? Like locking your own mother outside on Thanksgiving? My aunt shifted uncomfortably. She embarrassed us. The neighbors were asking questions. What were we supposed to do? "Maybe," I said, stepping closer, "you were supposed to remember who she is, what she's done. Maybe you were supposed to honor the woman who bled for this country instead of shutting her out because you don't like the smell of her perfume." "It's not perfume," my cousin muttered. "It's her. She doesn't bathe right anymore." The room fell silent. The words hung in the air, cruel and jagged. Grandma's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Coffee's ready, children." She sounded so proud, so unaware of the venom that had just been spilled about her. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just neglect. This was betrayal. Later, when I walked her back to her room, I noticed the cracked leather trunk at the foot of her bed. I had seen it 1,000 times, but never thought much of it. She ran her hand over it absently. "Don't let them take it," she whispered suddenly, her voice sharp and clear. "They'll try, but it's mine." I knelt beside her. "What's in there, Grandma?" Her eyes darted to mine, lucid for one fleeting moment. What's left of me? Then she blinked, and the fog returned. She patted my cheek, smiled that weary smile, and asked if I wanted more coffee. I sat there, staring at that trunk, listening to the faint sound of my relatives laughing again downstairs. And I knew, deep down, that whatever was coming next, it was going to change everything. Because if they thought they could erase her the way they tried to erase me, they were about to learn what it meant to provoke two soldiers from the same bloodline. My grandmother had fought for this country. I had followed her footsteps. And now, it was time to fight for her. Thanksgiving night carried a cruel kind of silence. The dishes were stacked in the sink, the laughter long gone, the smell of roasted turkey still clinging to the air like a ghost. I sat at the edge of my childhood bed, staring at the shadows stretching across the ceiling, every sound in the house, the creak of the floorboards, the cough from down the hall, felt like a reminder of what had happened. But the worst sound of all was none at all. Grandma's room was quiet. No soft humming, no gentle footsteps. Just silence. I pushed up from the bed and walked down the hall. Her door was ajar. I peeked inside, expecting to see her asleep, but the bed was empty. Panic gripped me. I rushed to the kitchen, then to the living room. Nothing. Finally, I opened the back door and felt the cold air rush in. She was outside. Again. Wrapped in the same thin sweater, she sat on the porch steps with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the moon. Her plate from dinner still sat beside her, untouched, mashed potatoes congealed and gray, turkey stiff and cold. "Grandma!" I whispered, kneeling beside her. "Why are you out here?" She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were wide, lost, like a child who had been scolded. "They said, I don't belong inside. Not anymore." Her words sliced through me. Who said that? Before she could answer, the sliding door opened behind us. My father stood there, arms crossed, his silhouette dark against the warm light spilling from inside. "She kept wandering," he said flatly. "We can't have her getting into things. It's easier this way." "Easier for who?" I snapped, rising to my feet. "For you? For your pride? She's freezing out here." "She's fine," he muttered. "She doesn't even notice half the time." "She notices enough," I fired back. "She notices that she's being treated like an animal." My uncle joined him at the door, smirking as he sipped his wine. "You're overreacting. She doesn't even remember what day it is. Stop making everything a battle." My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. Stop making everything a battle. That's what they always said, as if I were the problem, as if defending her dignity was some kind of weakness. Grandma's voice cracked behind me. "Don't fight, children, please!" I turned back to her, and the sight shattered me. She was shivering, tears streaking her wrinkled cheeks, clutching her frail hands together as if begging for peace. And they stood there, my father and uncle, unmoved. "You know what?" I said, my voice low but trembling with rage. "You're right about one thing. She doesn't remember every detail, but I do. And so does everyone else in this town. They remember her service. They remember what she sacrificed. And I'm going to make sure they remember what you did to her tonight." My mother appeared behind them, whispering urgently, "Don't say things you'll regret." "Regret?" I laughed bitterly. "The only regret here is yours. That you forgot who raised you, who kept this house standing when you were too busy thinking about yourselves." The silence stretched heavy, thicker than the cold air. My cousins hovered in the background, wide-eyed, their cell phones glowing faintly in their hands. I realized some of them were recording. Good. Let them. Let the world see. I bent down and lifted Grandma's plate. The food was stone cold, the cranberry sauce hardened to jelly. I carried it inside and dropped it on the dining table with a sharp clatter. The sound echoed, startling them all. "This," I said, pointing at the plate, "is what you gave her. After everything she's given you. You should be ashamed to sit in this house, ashamed to eat at this table." For once, no one spoke. Their eyes darted away, their faces pale. And then I said it, the 4 words that had burned in my chest all night. She stays. You leave. The air seemed to crack open. My aunt gasped. My uncle nearly dropped his wine glass, and my father's face turned red with fury. "What did you just say?" he hissed. "You heard me," I said, my voice steady now. "She's not leaving this house. Not for some facility. Not for your convenience. If anyone leaves, it's you. All of you." The room erupted. My uncle shouted that I had no right. My aunt cried that I was tearing the family apart. My father's voice thundered, demanding I take it back. And through it all, Grandma sat quietly at the table, her frail hands folded, her eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in years, pride. My cousins shouted over each other, one of them knocking over a glass that shattered across the hardwood. The chaos swelled until it was deafening. They were screaming, just like I knew they would. And I stood there in the center of it, calm, steady, unflinching, because I was my grandmother's granddaughter, a soldier, like her, and I had just declared war. The chaos that followed my words was almost musical. 4 simple words: she stays, you leave. That was all it took to shatter the illusion my family had wrapped themselves in. My uncle's wine glass slipped from his hand, the stem snapping against the hardwood, shards scattering like ice. My cousin let out a yelp when a piece sliced her bare foot. My father's face went pale, then flushed an angry crimson, and my mother gasped, pressing a napkin to her lips. They had expected me to be the obedient daughter, quiet, agreeable, grateful. They had forgotten that I didn't learn obedience from them. I learned strength from her. "Grandma." She sat at the table, the blanket still draped around her shoulders. For the first time in years, she seemed steady. Her eyes, though clouded with memory's fog, flickered with something sharp when she heard my voice cut through the room. She looked at me as if she recognized the soldier she had raised. "What are you talking about?" my father barked, his fork clattering onto his plate. I stepped forward, set my hands on the table, and leaned in. My tone was even, deliberate, like the way I spoke to recruits when they tested boundaries. I said, "She stays. You leave. Tonight." My cousins looked at one another, wide-eyed. One of them whispered, "She can't be serious." "Oh, she's serious," my uncle spat. "Look at her. Just like her grandmother, always barking orders, thinking the uniform makes her better than the rest of us." The word uniform hung in the air. I wasn't even wearing it, but I didn't need to. My posture alone betrayed me. Shoulders squared, chin high, every nerve sharpened by years of command. I didn't back down. "You're right," I said softly. "I did follow in her footsteps. And you all, are eating because of her sacrifice. Every light in this house is paid for by her pension. Every mortgage bill, every holiday dinner, every coat you wore as children. She gave it to you. And how do you repay her? By leaving her to freeze?" My mother shifted uncomfortably, her face tight with guilt. "You don't understand." "No," I cut in, my voice rising. "I do understand. I understand perfectly. You don't want to be reminded that the woman you've dismissed as a burden is the reason you even had a chance to build this life. You don't want to see what love really looks like, because it means admitting you failed her." My father slammed his hand against the table. "This is my house. You don't come in here after years away and start telling us what to do." I leaned in closer, lowering my voice until it was almost a whisper. "Then maybe you should remember whose name is still on that deed. Because it's not yours, Dad. It's hers. This house belongs to Grandma. And if she wants to sit at this table, nothing gives you the right to stop her." The room froze again. Forks hovered mid-air. My father's eyes flicked toward the old trunk in her room, then quickly away. That tiny, guilty glance told me everything. He knew exactly what was inside, and he feared I might know too. I didn't. Not yet, but I would. My cousins started muttering, their voices rising in panic. What does she mean? What's in the deed? Dad, what's she talking about? I could see their faces drain of color, see the shame and the fear mingling. The recordings on their phones were forgotten, left buzzing with notifications on the table. My father finally pushed back his chair. Enough. We'll discuss this later. No, I said. We'll discuss it now, tonight, in front of her. I turned to Grandma, who sat silently, her hand resting on the table, because she deserves to hear it. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Please, not now. She won't even remember." "That's the point," I said. "She might forget tomorrow, but you won't. You'll remember every word I say tonight, and so will I." The rage that had burned inside me for hours settled into something colder, heavier. It wasn't the fire of anger anymore. It was the weight of duty. A soldier doesn't raise her voice when she's about to strike. A soldier steadies her breathing. I looked at each of them, one by one. My father, who had dismissed me as a child chasing foolish dreams. My mother, who had always told me to be quiet, to sit still, to not embarrass the family. My uncles, who had taken and taken from Grandma until she had nothing left. My cousins, raised in comfort they didn't earn, now sneering at the woman who sacrificed everything for them. In that moment, I didn't see family. I saw a room full of cowards, and I knew exactly how to make them scream. It wouldn't be fists or shouting. That would only give them an excuse to paint me as the angry soldier daughter. No, the battle wouldn't be fought with violence. It would be fought with truth, with exposure, with the authority they'd forgotten I carried, not just as a granddaughter, not just as a soldier, but as someone who refused to let injustice slide. I reached for my phone, opened the camera, and hit record. "Let's talk about who Grandma really is," I said. The panic in their eyes deepened. One cousin slammed his hand on the table. Another tried to lunge for my phone. But I was quicker. Years of drills, years of combat, they weren't ready for me. I stepped back, calm as stone, holding the phone steady. "This woman," I said, turning the camera toward Grandma, "is a decorated veteran. She bled for this country. She raised her children alone, paid your bills with her pension, and carried this family when none of you would lift a finger. And tonight, you made her sit outside on Thanksgiving because you said she smelled. That's who you are, and the world deserves to know." The room erupted again, but this time, the screaming wasn't just denial. It was fear. Fear of exposure, of the neighbors hearing, of the recordings making their way to the small-town gossip chain, then to the veterans' community. "They started screaming," I whispered into the phone, making sure the words were captured. Grandma's lips twitched. For just a second, her eyes cleared again, and she gave me a look that was half pride, half sorrow. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her silence said everything. "I see you. I raised you for this." And I realized the fight had only just begun. The video kept recording as the voices in the dining room rose to a furious pitch. My cousins lunged, but I didn't flinch. I shifted my weight, planted my boots firm on the hardwood, and barked, "Sit down." The word cracked through the room like a command over a loudspeaker. Maybe it was the way I said it. Sharp, unwavering, the way I'd learned to control a squad under fire. But they obeyed. Chairs scraped, bodies dropped back into their seats, and the screaming cut off into a nervous silence. I turned the phone back toward me. My voice was calm, but inside, my blood boiled. "These people," I said into the lens, "locked their own mother on the porch during Thanksgiving dinner. The same mother who served this country in uniform, who sacrificed everything for them. And tonight, they laughed while she sat outside with nothing but a cold plate of pie." My father shot up again, face purple with rage. "Turn that thing off! You think anyone cares about some old woman who can't even remember her own name?" I tilted the phone toward him. "You hear that? That's her son talking. The son who lived in her house rent-free, paid for by her veteran's pension. His jaw worked, but no words came. My mother reached for his arm, her eyes darting nervously to the camera. I pressed on, my voice steady as a drumbeat. You all think her memory fading means her worth has faded. But I remember, and so do hundreds of soldiers who served with her. So do the neighbors who saw her working 2 jobs while you were out drinking. And they'll hear this story. They'll know exactly how you treated her. My uncle slammed his fist on the table. You wouldn't dare! I took a step closer, lowering the phone, but not turning it off. I already did. This is live streaming to my friends. Veterans across the country are watching right now. Every insult you spit, every time you call her a burden, they see it. My cousin's face drained of color as he grabbed his phone. She's not kidding. It's online. People are commenting. Hundreds of them. Panic rippled across the table. My mother stood, wringing her hands. Turn it off, please. People will think we're monsters. They won't have to think, I said. They'll know. I walked back to Grandma, still seated at the table, the blanket slipping off her shoulders. She looked at me with that half-lucid expression, a faint smile curling her lips. You sound just like me, she whispered. I nodded. That's because you raised me. The room was tense, buzzing with nervous whispers and sharp breaths. But I wasn't done. I bent down, slid my hand under the old leather trunk at the foot of Grandma's bed, and dragged it into the dining room. The metal clasps clinked as I set it down with a thud. What are you doing? My father demanded, his voice cracking. I flipped open the lid. Inside, neatly folded, were her uniforms. The olive drab jacket with faded patches, the cap with its frayed edges. And beneath them, stacks of envelopes, bank statements, certificates, letters from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I lifted one stack of yellowed papers and held them high. Do you even know what this is? This is the record of every cent she earned in service. This pension, the one you cash every month, doesn't belong to you. It belongs to her. And when she passes, it doesn't go to you. It goes to the person she named years ago. I looked directly at my father. And spoiler alert, it's not you. The silence shattered. My father lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers from my hand, but I stepped back, my training kicking in. He stumbled, knocking over his chair. My uncle cursed, rising to help him, but I raised my hand, palm out, and they froze again. You can bully her, I said. You can lie to yourselves, but you will not touch her, not while I'm here. My cousin, the same one who had mocked her smell, swallowed hard. What do you mean it's not going to Dad? I set the papers down, tapped the top page. It means she changed her will years ago. After Grandpa died, she made her choice. She left everything to me. A collective gasp filled the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth again, her eyes wide with disbelief. My father's face went from red to ashen. You're lying, he whispered. I'm not, I said. I've seen the documents, the house, the pension, every cent. It's mine, because she trusted me to honor her, to protect her, to carry on what she built. And tonight, you gave me more reason than ever to keep that promise. The room dissolved into chaos again. Voices shouted, chairs scraped, fists slammed the table. My cousins protested, claiming it wasn't fair. My father's voice boomed over them all, but there was panic in it now, not authority. You think you can just take everything, he roared. I looked at him, calm as ever. I don't have to take it. She already gave it to me. And you know why? Because you gave up your right to be her children the moment you left her out there. The truth landed like a blow. My words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of every sacrifice she had made, every injustice they had tried to bury. And for the first time, I saw it register. My father's face crumpled. My mother's hands shook. My uncle muttered curses under his breath, but even he wouldn't meet my eyes. Behind me, Grandma's voice came soft, trembling but clear. "It's all right, sweetheart. They don't understand." I turned to her, my throat tight. "No, Grandma. They will understand. I'll make sure of it." I looked back at the family, still frozen in their chairs. The live stream was still rolling. Comments poured across the screen. How could they? That poor woman. We stand with the veteran. My phone buzzed with notifications, support flooding in from people who remembered what service meant, what sacrifice looked like. For once, it wasn't just my voice against theirs. The whole world was watching. And that was the first taste of justice. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, the video had spread far beyond my circle of friends. Veterans groups had shared it, community forums buzzed, and neighbors whispered on front porches. My phone lit up with messages. Soldiers I'd served with, strangers from across the country, even local reporters. "We saw what you did. We stand with your grandmother. Tell us where to be." By noon, the quiet street outside our house filled with cars. Men and women stepped out, some leaning on canes, others in wheelchairs, many in uniforms that had long since faded. Their ribbons gleamed in the sunlight. They had come because they knew. They had come because they'd seen themselves in her. My family panicked. Curtains were drawn tight. My father muttered about embarrassment and public humiliation. My mother sobbed, begging me to make them leave. But it was too late. The truth had broken free, and it was marching up our front walk. I opened the door before they could knock. The first man to greet me was an old Marine, his hands trembling as he saluted. "Your grandmother," he said, his voice rough with age, "was there when I was pulled out of the field hospital in '52. I owe her my life. I never forgot her name, and I never will." Behind him, others stepped forward, each with their own story. "She patched me up. She saved my buddy. She carried more than her share when others dropped." I turned to look at Grandma, seated in her chair by the window. At first, she seemed lost, her eyes drifting. But as the voices poured in, something changed. Her back straightened, her gaze sharpened. For a moment, the fog of her memory cleared, and she saw them. Not just the faces before her, but the ghosts of the men and women she'd once fought beside. Tears slid down her cheeks. We helped her to the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The crowd fell silent as she stepped out. And then, as if on cue, every veteran there raised their hand in salute. The sight stole my breath. 100 hands, weathered and scarred, lifted toward the frail woman who had once carried them through hell. One by one, they approached her, placing small tokens at her feet, dog tags, patches, photos, a tribute not of words, but of lives touched. My father stood behind me, rigid and pale. He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, but no sound came. My uncle turned away, ashamed. My mother clutched her hands together, trembling. Grandma, with surprising strength, raised her hand in return. Her salute was shaky but steady enough, and the veterans cheered, their voices cracking with emotion. The local news had arrived by then. Cameras clicked, microphones captured every sound. The story was no longer confined to our dining room. It was spilling into the world, undeniable. A reporter asked me, "What do you want people to know about her?" I swallowed hard, looking at the woman who had given me everything. "I want them to know she is not forgotten. She is not a burden. She is the backbone of this family and this country, and she deserves to be honored, not hidden." The crowd roared in agreement. And then, in a moment that broke me open, Grandma spoke. Her voice was thin, but it carried, cutting through the noise like a hymn. "They are still my children." The crowd hushed. My father choked on a sob. My mother's tears spilled freely. My cousins stared at the ground, shame flooding their faces. Even after all they had done, even after they had cast her out on the porch, insulted her, betrayed her, She called them her children. She loved them still. The veterans bowed their heads. Some wept openly. I felt my knees weaken, not from sorrow, but from awe. That was who she was. Strong enough to carry pain, forgiving enough to carry love. I knelt beside her, pressing my forehead to hers. "Grandma," I whispered, "you don't have to forgive them." She smiled faintly. Love is heavier than anger, but it carries further. The words burrowed into me, both a blessing and a burden. I had sworn revenge, but she had chosen grace, and somehow, both were true. The tribute lasted hours. Neighbors brought food, children placed flowers in her lap. Strangers who had only read the story online drove miles just to say thank you. By evening, the porch was covered in tokens of gratitude. My family had no choice but to watch, each gift a reminder of the truth they had ignored. For once, I didn't need to shout. Justice wasn't in my words anymore. It was in the eyes of every veteran who saluted her, in every tear shed for her, in the way the world now saw her as she truly was, a hero. When the last visitor left, the house fell silent again. But it was a different silence, heavy, reverent. I helped her back inside, tucking her into her chair with a blanket. She sighed, content. Her eyes closed, but her lips curved into the faintest smile. And for the first time in years, she looked at peace. That night, the house felt different. Not because the walls had changed or the furniture had moved, but because something heavy had shifted in the air. The same dining room that had echoed with cruel laughter just 24 hours before was now thick with a silence that felt almost holy. The table was still littered with plates and half-empty wine glasses, but no one had the appetite to finish. My father sat hunched at the end of the table, staring at his hands. He had always been larger than life to me, towering, loud, the kind of man who filled every room he entered. But now, he looked smaller somehow, like a boy caught in the act. My uncle avoided my eyes completely, fidgeting with the stem of his glass until it cracked in his fingers. My mother dabbed at her face with a tissue, though the tears wouldn't stop. And Grandma? She was resting in her chair, wrapped in the blanket I'd pulled around her, breathing slowly. A soft smile tugged at her lips. She didn't remember the details anymore. What had been said, the insults, even the cold porch where she'd been left. But her heart remembered the warmth of people saluting, the kindness of strangers, the unexpected love that had come flooding back through the front door. I stood behind her chair like a guard, my hand resting lightly on her shoulder. I could feel the delicate rise and fall of her chest. Each breath she took seemed like proof that she still belonged here. "You humiliated us," my father said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. "Broadcasting our family business to the whole town. Do you know what people are saying about us?" I met his eyes. "They're saying the truth, that you left your own mother to freeze. If the truth humiliates you, maybe it should." He flinched, and for once he didn't argue. He just stared at me, then at her. It was my mother who finally spoke, her voice trembling. "We didn't mean to hurt her. We didn't know what else to do. She forgets so much now. Sometimes she calls me by her sister's name. Sometimes she doesn't recognize me at all." I softened, just a little. "So, you give her love anyway. That's what she did for you, Mom. Don't you remember? She worked nights to pay for your piano lessons. She kept the lights on when Dad lost his job. She took care of us when you couldn't get out of bed. Did she ever call you a burden?" My mother's lip quivered. She shook her head. I pressed on. "Then why now? Why, when she needs you most, do you turn your back on her?" My uncle slammed his fist on the table. "Because it's not fair. Do you think it was easy growing up under her shadow? Every teacher, every neighbor, every coach. Oh, you're Margaret's kids, the war heroes' kids. We never measured up. And now, even in her old age, we're still compared to her, still living in her shadow." His words stunned me for a moment. So that was it. Not just convenience, not just shame, jealousy. All these years, they'd been carrying quiet resentment toward the very woman who had sacrificed for them. I shook my head slowly. You wanted the glory without the sacrifice. You wanted the house, the respect, the recognition, but you didn't want to do the work. She did, and now you hate her for it. He opened his mouth to argue, then shut it again. His face crumpled, his voice breaking. We didn't know how to live up to her. Behind me, I felt Grandma stir. Her eyes opened, hazy at first, then suddenly sharp. She looked straight at him, her son, and whispered, "You didn't have to. You just had to love me." The room broke. My aunt sobbed openly, clutching her chest. My father lowered his head into his hands. My cousins sat frozen, their phones buzzing with messages from friends who had seen the video, friends who were horrified by their cruelty. I knelt beside Grandma, tears burning my eyes. "You always forgave us," I whispered, "even when we didn't deserve it." She reached for my hand, her fingers frail but warm. "That's what soldiers do, sweetheart. We fight and we forgive. Both take courage." Her words were simple, but they struck with the force of truth. I realized then that my vow, "they'll regret her tears," had already come true. Not through vengeance, but through exposure. The world had seen. Their shame was public. Their laughter had turned to screams, their arrogance to silence. The local veterans group returned 2 days later with city officials. They presented Grandma with a folded flag, the kind given only to those who had served with honor. They pinned her medals on her blanket, one by one, explaining each to the crowd gathered on our lawn. The neighbors clapped. Some wept openly. "Today," the commander said, his voice cracking, "we honor Margaret Collins for her service, her sacrifice, and her enduring love for this community." I glanced at my father, standing stiffly at the edge of the crowd. His face was wet, though he tried to hide it. My mother clutched his arm, her own tears flowing freely. My cousins stood behind them, subdued, their phones lowered for once. When they called Grandma forward, she needed both my hands to rise. I steadied her, my training no longer for war, but for this, helping her take each careful step toward the flag that symbolized her sacrifice. The crowd went silent, and then, as she stood in front of them, every veteran lifted their hand in salute. It was the kind of respect she had been denied for decades, pouring over her in waves. She looked around, blinking, as if trying to understand why all these people had come. Then she smiled, that gentle, humble smile I remembered from childhood, and whispered words that silenced everyone. "They are still my children." 4 words, not the ones I had spoken, not the ones that made my family scream. These were hers, simple, tender, unbreakable. Tears blurred my vision. I felt her hand squeeze mine, shaky but firm. Even in the haze of memory slipping away, her love remained intact, pure, unconditional. I realized something then. My revenge hadn't been about tearing my family down. It had been about lifting her up. And in lifting her, I had exposed their cruelty for what it was. They had been judged, not by me, but by their own mother's grace and by the eyes of the world. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me, sweetheart. Don't let them forget." I brushed her silver hair back, kissed her forehead, and whispered back, "I promise, Grandma. Your legacy lives with me. They'll never forget." I stood at the window long after she drifted to sleep. Outside, the porch was empty now, but the tokens from the veterans still covered the railing. Dog tags, medals, folded letters, proof that she mattered, proof she was loved. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not the restless anger of a soldier looking for a fight, but the steady strength of a granddaughter carrying her grandmother's torch. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this story wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been forgotten, dismissed, or cast aside. everyone who had given their all and been repaid with silence. I had spoken 4 words and they had screamed. But Grandma's 4 words, "They are still my children," those would echo far longer. They would heal and convict in the same breath. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of the quiet strength of our elders, of our veterans, and of the power of unconditional love. And if you'd like to hear more stories that honor resilience, dignity, and justice, I invite you to subscribe and stay with us. Sometimes the most powerful battles are fought not on battlefields, but at the family table.